Hey friends, I'm Sabrina, the rookie around here. John and Dick are the old school American fans of F1. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation we had about the 2023 Miami Grand Prix. It's the second iteration of this race. As Americans, we've been waiting to see how the first of this season's 3 US-based Grands Prix would shape up. In our post-race debrief, the guys provided me with insights on racing and manufacturer tactics, as well as pressures the drivers are up against that as a novice I wouldn't necessarily notice or think about, but should definitely be considered when evaluating a team's development and strategies. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Gentlemen, now we are here discussing the first of 3 US-based Grand Prix. I don't know about you. It was an interesting weekend for me. I want to start with talking about free practice. I'd love to talk about qualifying and then the Grand Prix itself. I have some thoughts, but I need your help to analyze, or the weekend, I guess, just to kind of put it into perspective when I look at the full calendar. So, John, I'm going to start with you. Free practice. What did you see that was promising, both for the weekend, maybe for the full calendar, considering where we are in the calendar? What do you think the teams are gathering when it comes to data on both of those ends? Do you see some hope when it comes to long-term development? Because I asked that because we didn't have free practice in the previous race at the Baku race. So I'm assuming the focus of the teams this weekend in Miami, they wanted to get as much, especially knowing that they would have a break before going to Imola.
This is one of the last opportunities they have to gather data for updates as they come back to Europe. So I felt like they had an opportunity. Things were close enough and open enough that they had some time to gather data. So that should accrue to benefit of all the teams. And, that really plays to the longer term development side of things. I don't think they were able to get enough information to really make much difference in the short run. But the long-term prospects should be pretty good from what they were able to gather.
Do you think that I heard that it rained overnight, either Friday into Saturday or Saturday into Sunday? Would those kinds of changes have helped them to also see different data for the future development, like to send back to the teams back home?
I think that would hinder them more than anything because the rubber comes up and they have a greener track. So my view would be that that doesn't help them at all.
What about you, Dick?
Well, I thought it was interesting, and I don't remember if it was in free practice or in quali, but they were showing the onboard data for Red Bull going down the main straightaway, and then they showed the onboard data for I think it was Lewis in the Mercedes. And the Red Bull was 12 miles an hour faster down the straight. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, why even show up to race?
Yeah.
And because, you're going bear hunting with a switch. I mean, that's what that is. And so, it really, to me, was like a foreshadowing. When you have that kind of a speed differential, my thought was, well, it's going to be really easy for Red Bull to just stretch it out every time they hit that straightaway. They can be matching all the other teams, the best of the rest, right, through the twisty bits, and then they get on the straightaway and they say, hey, thanks for coming out today. For me, it was sort of like, okay, here we are. Somebody's going to have to figure out how to make their car more slippery. I do believe that the Honda is a big, big engine, but surely it can't be that much better than the Mercedes or the Ferrari. I definitely think it's better than the Renault engine, but I mean, that's kind of my take.
That's kind of my question to you, Dick, is do you see any way that any of the other teams are going to pick up 12 miles an hour over the course of the season? I just don't see it.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that it's going to take a massive redesign somewhere to produce the kind of downforce that the Red Bull is obviously producing and yet still be fast in a straight line. And that's why, part of me wants to say that Honda has got to be a big engine, man, because you know,
Right.
it's not like Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin have got a bunch of, junior engineers trying to figure it out, and they just happen to build draggy cars. You know, when you got big horsepower, you can cover up a lot of flaws in the rest of your car. You know, as an aside, in 1994, Roger Penske showed up at Indianapolis with an engine that took advantage of the rules. It was built by Mercedes,
Yeah.
and they had like 200 horsepower more than everybody else. And they just destroyed the field. And, you know, of course, then
Wow.
the sanctioning body goes in, oh, yeah, change the rules, makes that engine more logically like all the other engines. And so Penske goes back to the Chevy Ilmore. And all of a sudden, the next year, they don't even qualify because the chassis was so bad. You know, it was just because they had Godzilla horsepower. And, you know, it kind of makes me think, that story makes me think about what was going on with Red Bull, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
That, I mean, like, I'm pausing to process everything you just said, because it seems that they're in a league of their own, and this would answer that question.
The only thing that tends to make me wonder about it, it's two things. Either the only other team using the same engine as Red Bull is AlphaTauri, right?
Mhm.
AlphaTauri's nowhere. So that says to me, either their junior engineers really got it wrong, right? Just wrong, or they are the lesser of equals when it comes to Red Bull and the engines they're getting, which is possible.
Is the second option allowed inside of the world of F1? Like,
Sure.
are you allowed?
Sure,
Really?
why not? Yeah. I mean, there was talk that earlier this year, that Mercedes, after seeing how fast Alonso was or is, and comparing that against Lewis and George, it was sort of like, oh, well, maybe he needs to have a special engine. And so they came to Aston Martin and said, would you guys be interested in having Lewis's next engine? Now, that's a rumor. I don't think that that's for sure, but that tells you everything you need to know. I've got stories about special parts being put on people's cars for certain races, and then those parts disappear after the race. I actually witnessed it myself on cars that I was running, so I know it happens.
Wait, but is that allowed? That's what I'm trying to process here. You're allowed to do that in the rules?
For some classes, sure. And you know, really, you think about it, the engine is the engine unit, right? It's the internal combustion unit. And then it's the electrical, you know, the MGHUs and all that. Okay. So if it's the Mercedes piece, you plug them all in when the motor's, you know, the motor that's in the car, mileage is out, stick the new one in, and it's still a Mercedes engine. It's just, maybe it's a little bit more special.
Wow.
And you do have to pull those engines apart if you want to see some of those parts. And sometimes they don't get pulled apart.
Huh.
Yep.
That's like,
I mean, right.
no, go ahead.
If you think about it, Sabrina, like, let's say you're Williams, okay? You're a Mercedes engine customer. That engine is merely a consumable, just like tires are. You run it for a certain amount of time, you pull it out the back, you hand it to the gentleman wearing the T-shirt that says Mercedes, and he hands you a box that's got a brand new engine, and you stick it in the back of your car, and off you go. And you're not allowed to open it up. You're not allowed to look in it. It is just another component of the car, and it's no different than a tire. It gets used up, and you put a new one on.
Wow. I mean, that really changes the way I perceive, like, the relationships between the teams. Like, it's kind of rocking my understanding. This is why I love the conversations we get to have, because you guys give me things that I don't see as a novice, and you guys have.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, for instance,
that's insights.
Why would Mercedes give another team a better engine than they've got?
That's right.
So that they could show up the manufacturer team. That's not going to happen. I guarantee you, no matter how equal the engines are, the more equal engine is going to be in the manufacturer car, not the team car that's a customer.
Yep.
That's right. And that's part of was that part of who was it that had a controversy with their manufacturer and they left? Wasn't that with Red Bull previously
Red
with
Bull.
Renault?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, now it's making more sense. Okay. Well, thank you. Okay, I have more questions though. Let's move on to qualifying, Dick. I noted Charles's crash in Q3 changing and affecting, everyone's perceptions of how the grid was going to sit. What did you think? What were your thoughts about it?
So, a number of things. Number one, as we've discussed in the past, Charles is starting to make more and more mental errors and crash the car because he's over driving it. He knows the car has got a significant deficit to, for sure, Red Bull, probably Aston Martin, and he is desperate to make up that difference by his driving. And I think that based on what I heard from some of the drivers, they were all saying that the track online gripped up really, really well. But you get just a little bit offline, the grip just fell away. And I could see where Charles maybe left his braking just a little bit too late for that corner or something. And the car, obviously lost maybe a little bit of adhesion in the sticky part. And then it hit the part that didn't have much grip, and he just went straight off the track. That's a possibility. The other one is he could have just been caught out by a gust of wind, because it was gusty that day. And there were parts of the track where you had to be, a little bit wary, I think. And, a little gust of wind could have moved the car over onto that low grip section of the track.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you on that. Okay, sorry to interrupt you on that one, because I have a feeling that John's got a different opinion, because we talked offline a little bit about this, and I got to let him insert into that. John, do you agree with that gust of wind?
Well, I don't know. I mean, as we talked offline, it's hard. I know these guys are really good, but it's hard for me to imagine that a 4 or 5 mile an hour gust compared, now if it's more than that I can understand it, but a 4 or 5 mile an hour gust, it's hard for me to imagine that upsets these guys enough that they lose it big time like that. But more than that, and this is Charles' sort of playbook. He goes along for a while. He's brilliant. There's no question the guy's really, really fast. But he goes along for a while, and then he just absolutely bends the car, and he says, this is completely unacceptable. He takes responsibility. It's completely unacceptable. It can never happen again. And he goes down the road, 3, 4, 5, 6 races, half a season, whatever. And then he does it again. And he says, this can never happen again. So I don't know whether this was that. I do think that Dick is absolutely right in the first part of that. And that is, he knows he's got a car that's got a deficit. He's overdriving the car. This car in particular, no car really likes that, but this car in particular does not respond well to that.
Dick, what say you?
I totally agree.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not really. Because I do say that, like you said, if it was a 4 or 5 mile an hour gust, that would not be enough to move the car a foot offline, right? It would not be enough. But having been actually driving past the track on that day, on my trip down to the Florida Keys, thank you very much, I can tell you that my rental car was getting moved around pretty good as I was going past Hard Rock Stadium. So I think that the wind was bigger than any 4 or 5 miles an hour, honestly.
Well, I can see a 15 or 20 mile an hour gust. That I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of funky, man. I mean, it was, and of course, I'm going down a highway, and I don't know how that highway lined up in terms of, you know, directionally how it lined up with where Charles went off. But I mean, I literally, Hard Rock Stadium was no more than half a mile away from the freeway that I was driving down, and mine was moving. That Jeep that I was given, I was moving around pretty good.
How would you compare the aerodynamics on that Jeep to the F1 car? maybe that's a subject for another discussion.
Yeah, it's about like a flying brick. There you go.
Well, okay. I think we're at a draw on this one. And yes, I was trying to pit you guys a little bit because I wanted to hear both sides of this. Well, maybe it's slightly because I'm such a Charles fan, but I also want to give it I want to be intellectually honest and assess him properly in that crash, since it had such ramifications for how the grid ended on the front of the grid. So on that note, what did you guys think about how the grid formed leading into the race? Were you excited to see a little bit of that?
Yeah, I will just say I was shocked that Red Bull did not send Max out on a banker lap to start with. I mean, to me, that's just basic blocking and tackling, pardon the analogy, but I mean, that's really what it is. And so for him to get caught out and, start P9 just because they really did not go out and do what they needed to do, that was a little bit of a shock. And I think guys like Alonso were sort of like laughing under their breath because it was sort of like, really, Red Bull? Thank you. That's a gimme, even though everybody knew Max was going to be coming through.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, well, I just had a question for Dick on that. Do you think that Red Bull, this is a little bit of a crack in their armor and that they've let their guard down just a little bit because the car is so superior? I just don't see anybody catching them this year. Do you think they've kind of relaxed a little bit and they got caught out?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Human nature being human nature, I would have to say there's a good chance that they could very well be getting just a little bit smug, and, and this is a team that's certainly at its core, its core leadership, they know how to win world championships. They've done it, right? And so they know that they've got to just, they've got to put their foot on the necks of the competition and keep it there until the season is over with. But at the same time, maybe the rank and file doesn't necessarily buy into that. Long season, we're going to pace ourselves, blah, blah, blah. And so as a result, there may be a certain amount of vision casting. Yeah, complacency among the ranks. Not that they're not working hard or anything like that, but it's like, we got it in the bag, because it can easily, and I've had seasons like this where you go out there, and John, you probably have too. It's sort of like you just go in to every race expecting to win. Yeah. And when you do win, it's just sort of like, okay, mission accomplished, job done, but there's really no like, woohoo, we won. But when you lose, it's an absolute shock, and you walk out of there and it's like devastating. But, when you win, it's just kind of like very ho-hum. And it could very well be that they're starting to get like that because they are so dominant. That's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth.
John?
No, I think it's possible. The other thing that kind of stands out in my mind is that they came from Baku to Miami in a matter of days, and they're dealing with all of that. And so I typically think the mechanics are the ones, the guys down doing the really precision work on the ground. But the strategists may also be a bit fatigued just from the travel hardship. And so that could have affected their thinking, their decision making may have been off a bit on that basis.
I think that's very valid. I mean, it was just a handful of days. Okay, so let's talk about Sunday itself, the Grand Prix. And to me, it seemed like the tire strategy was what really set people into good place to be able to execute whatever they were wanting to do. And I specifically saw an article that was written by Bernie Collins on F1 TV. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to read out a couple of quotes from it to help set the table of why I'm thinking the way that I'm thinking. She wrote, Sunday's Miami Grand Prix saw Max Verstappen snatch victory from ninth on the grid. The Dutchman started on the hard tire and a long first stint allowed 25 laps in free air to maximize car pace and secure the win. However, the strategy was not unique to Verstappen nor Red Bull. Arguably, Verstappen had the pace to win regardless of the strategy selected. More on that below, which I'm not going to read for you guys. So what of the others? 7 teams: Red Bull, Mercedes, Alpine, Aston Martin, Haas, Alfa Romeo, and AlphaTauri chose to split the start tire across cars between the medium and the hard. All these tires put the driver that started the further back on the grid on the hard start tire and the driver ahead on the medium. This indicates that they all expected the medium tire start strategy to be preferred and that the hard tire brought benefits to the drivers starting further back and out of the podium. That was a very interesting and illuminating article for me that made me think, okay, this was what caused me to see what I saw for the race. What do you guys think, John?
Well, the fact that everybody chose relative to their position on the grid, everybody chose either the one strategy or the other, and all the guys at the front are going to choose the medium tire because they don't want to give up position, and all the guys on the back chose the hard tire because they want to take advantage of the guys on the medium tire when they come in for a tire change.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, that wasn't the key to this race. It was a logical decision on all players. But the difference I thought in this race had in the terms of Max's coming through and winning the race. It was the logical strategy for him to take based on position. But that wasn't really what won the race. That was just a sideshow for that. What won the race for him was his controlling the degradation of the tires and his pace, just his pace generally, because he had been faster, I think, than Checo for the whole weekend up to that point.
Yeah.
To the point of qualifying by half to 3/4 of a second. Just too much. And so I thought his pace, not to take away from his driving through the field, but I just think pace was the difference in the win, not the strategy this time.
That I can see that. What about you, Dick? What do you think?
Yeah, pretty much a reflection of what John's thinking, but I'm going to add one other piece, and that is that Max got to drive in clean air for a long time. And when you're driving in clean air, then your aero is working to its maximum efficiency. The car isn't going to be sliding around as much, so the tires aren't going to overheat and degrade as quickly. So I think that there was some benefits there. And he started the race on hard tires and, of course, a full fuel load. So if you're going to have a way of maybe optimizing your car later in the race, you don't see it happen real often, but going with the hard tire at first on that heavy fuel load and let the hard tires deal with that weight, and then the weight starts burning off as you start running laps. Well, by the time you get ready to throw on some mediums or even softs, now you've got a light car, and or at least a much lighter car. And then you can make those tires work. And I think that Max played it to perfection. Yes, his pace was great. I think he got the benefit of that clean air. And so it kind of became almost a perfect storm. I think my other comment would be is, they asked Fernando Alonso, hey, when do you think you'll see Max passing you? And he was kind of like, this was on Saturday after qualifying. He goes, probably about lap 25. Well, it was lap 15. Max he was on another planet.
Yeah, I remember watching. I think I was cooking lunch because I ate late, and I was watching it and I went, oh, okay, there he goes. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, all right, let me see what everybody else is doing right now, because I kind of know where this story is going to end. And as long as
Yep.
nobody has a crash, it just seems like that's just a given, which leads me to ask this question. Let's look at the different sections of the field, the front of field, the midfield, and the backbenchers. Specifically front of field. I'm going to start with you, Dick, but John, I want you to jump in, please, because I have a feeling you have thoughts about these teams. Red Bull, Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Mercedes. Those are the ones I'm thinking of when I think of front of field.
Yep.
What are y'all's thoughts? Dick first.
Well, we've pretty well covered it on Red Bull. I think, Max was flying all weekend. I think he was in a class by himself. Maybe he really likes that track for some reason. I don't know. But between Max and that Red Bull and that layout of the track, seemed like Max just said, oh, yeah, this is going to be easy, and went out and proved it, So that's kind of my take on Red Bull. Ferrari, again, I think Ferrari is probably okay, not Red Bull pace, but certainly the second or third fastest car on the grid over one lap. But they can't do it in the race. The car is just not there. And honestly, I mean, I know you're a Charles fan and all that, and there's no question he's super talented. I really think that Carlos Sainz is very quietly putting together a season that's probably as optimal as he can pull together for the equipment that he's got. I think he's making use of everything that he's got. It's not enough, but I think race after race, he's just out there. He doesn't say much. He doesn't, not flashy, nothing. He's just getting it done, Aston Martin, I honestly thought that Aston was going to just get their head handed to them, because we know that, at Baku, they came in, the only upgrade they had was an upgrade to the rear wing in terms of how it was being operated by DRS, that they had identified this as an issue. Well, Miami's got a couple of pretty long straightaways, nothing like Baku, but they've got some long straightaways. And I was just sitting there kind of going, yeah, if Fernando gets fifth or sixth, that's going to be pretty good. Well, he winds up on the podium, and he's out there cruising around and has the audacity to tell the reporters after the race, oh, yeah, it was pretty boring, but it was good to watch Lance's battle. And Lance made a couple of really nice passes I was watching on the big screen. I was thinking to myself, this guy is the ultimate gamesman. I mean, what a head game that he's playing here, right? Oh, my goodness. He's just a genius. And then you get to Mercedes, and, man, what a mixed bag. I mean, George seems to be able to drive the car. Lewis is not happy with it. I mean, he didn't make it out of Q2. What's interesting is that I guess Mercedes is bringing a big upgrade package to Imola, as is Aston Martin. And one of the things that apparently is coming is that they're changing the driving position, the seating arrangement itself, to make Lewis more comfortable in the car, which is fascinating. So anyway, that's my take.
Okay. Well, I've got to say, on the Red Bull one that you were talking about, Jolyon Palmer, when he was commentating, he said it looks like Max is playing on his F1's PlayStation. He doesn't even break a sweat. It's such an easy level, right? So I have to do that. And I think your comments about Carlos are spot on. I find that I respect the fact that he just wants to do his best. I don't remember where his contract is. Does he have is he up for renewal right now? Is it in his best interest just to stay slow and steady, not slow, but stay steady, keep going? That would be one of my questions to both of you guys as a follow-up. And then the Fernando one, didn't you hear he talked to the strategist and said, tell Lance good job, because he was watching him on the TV screen, apparently, and said, he said, I saw you pass. I thought, What in the world? This is unbelievable. The Mercedes aspect, when you talk about Lewis, I just wondered, we could talk about this probably at the end, but the pre-race stuff, it was such a high focus and he seemed like he was really connected to that. And I just wondered, is that distracting you right now, when right now your team needs you to stay totally focused on what you are there to do, which is to drive? That was a question I just had as a viewer. I don't know if that's fair to ask, but John, what are your thoughts?
Well, as far as Lewis goes, I don't think that the pre-game activities would really affect him. He's been doing this long enough that he can likely get into the zone where he needs to be very, very quickly. He has such
that's good.
methodical approach. And for those of us who've done this kind of thing, when you have that methodology to get in the zone, part of the getting there is just the methodology, and because you do it over and over and over again, you can actually get there pretty quickly. So I don't really think that was it. I think Lewis is unhappy with the position of the car. He's unhappy with Russell being faster than him sometimes. He's unhappy with the rules changes. He's unhappy with the human rights issues. He's just unhappy right now, and so it's going to take. I hope that the upgrades help him. They've been downplaying the upgrades and the effect that they'll have on Mercedes. So I don't know. I think that what they're doing is they're playing a little bit of a mental game to try and diminish people's expectations about them, and also to boost the team. If and when they do make sort of a big step, then the team will be re-energized and have a little more positive energy. Although Lewis, frankly, he does bring a pretty positive approach to it most of the time, which made me wonder, which strategist was that Alonso was talking to? Was that the race strategist or the psychology strategist? Because that was a brilliant. And you asked a little while ago, Sabrina, if there really were head games in psychology going on, and that was a classic. He was not just telling Lance that he was way out in front of him. He was telling the whole field that he was coasting and he wasn't using all of his skills to get where he was.
That he was actually a tad bit bored. Actually, right, as he was flying around the track, and whatever, we and so, and that's what I love is that in terms of psychological warfare, my money's on Fernando every time.
Absolutely,
because he will destroy you and enjoy it while he's doing it, and so he really will. He's just like that. And there's just drivers like that. And and Fernando is the man of the moment, so to speak.
The other thing I would say about this race and the front part of the field, the way that the qualifying matched up with Magnussen being up so high, it really let us. And I really want those who are new to Formula One to know something, and that is we may be at a very, very special moment in the history of the sport that only comes around about every 20 years. Where one driver is so superior to everybody else, and it's just streets apart. And people are beginning, and I think it's a little bit early yet, but they're beginning to compare Max to Senna. And like I say, that may be a bit early, but I do think that he has the potential to be that special. And if he is, people should really appreciate and enjoy him running to the front of the field. He's showed maturity. This drive in particular showed real maturity, I thought. He was very patient. Yep. He picked off people one at a time. He didn't get in a hurry. He was minding his tires. He was creating space for him, like Dick said, an excellent point, to be running in cool air or clean air and maximizing what his opportunities were. But behind that, and this is the other thing I want people to know, behind that, even though we may not have a real interesting battle for the lead through the season, behind that, this race was the best race I think we've had so far, because they were passing each other left, right, and center, and everybody, and it was under brakes. It wasn't just on the DRS.
Right.
so that's real driving skill that people are getting to see. And the show that Magnussen put on for 37 laps with Charles, passing him, holding him back, passing him again, just pounding him. That is really, that shows real heart. And, whoever K-Mag is, I just appreciate the heck out of his effort. He might have finished a little higher up if he'd have just taken the pass and just tucked in, but he showed that he was a fighter, and that's in the same category as Lewis and as Alonso and some others who are real fighters. And I that's what you want to see as a fan.
I love what you just said. It's so true, because I do remember, especially because it was Charles and Kevin, watching that and going, no, wait. And that was the part that did give me you did see the racing, not the, you did have to pay attention to that. That wasn't the thing I think that the cameras may have wanted to talk about as much. But if you were engaging the race, that is true. What you said also, this is probably one of the first races this season that we really have seen that kind of tactical behavior in a given race that we've been all waiting for. And I like the fact that you highlighted the 20-year aspect of this and where we find Formula One. For newbies like me, we need that context. So that's really, really good. I want to ask a question that goes back to the Aston Martin. And aren't they running a Mercedes engine?
Yes, they are.
The reason I'm asking this is because our preceding part of our conversation, when we were talking about the engines and you being the manufacturer. So what does that say about the Mercedes engine that Fernando doesn't feel like he's really having to work very hard? And yet Lewis has the Mercedes engine and he's not happy. What am I supposed to draw away from that?
Well, Lewis has the Mercedes chassis, and Alonso has the Aston chassis, and that's the difference. The motor is pretty darn close. That's one reason I think that they're kind of minimizing the expectations on the upgrades, because I think that they need and they hope that will propel them up to be at least competitive with Aston, and probably they're counting on it moving them in front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, my theory is that at some stage, Mercedes senior management is going to say, look, our car is not going to get it done, but the Aston Martin seems to. We're going to give Aston Martin, specifically Fernando, one of our special engines, because at least then our engines have a shot at winning.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was in senior leadership, that's what I would be thinking right now.
Senior leadership at Mercedes, not at Mercedes Grand Prix. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There's a lot to take in on that. All right, but I know time is going, so I want to get to the midfield. What about midfield? Alpine, AlphaTauri, McLaren, and Alfa Romeo. John, I didn't see anything discussed really about Alfa Romeo, but maybe you did. So let's start with them.
No, I didn't see a whole lot about that. I think that they're struggling. Clearly, everybody back in the midfield is struggling, because by comparison to Red Bull, which is the standard that everybody's comparing to, they just don't have it. And so they're struggling. They're spending tens of millions of dollars, over the course of a month, and people are unhappy and expectations are high and all of that kind of stuff. They're still in the early part of the season, where all of the hopes and expectations that everybody had are still, lingering in the ether out there, and they're just not being realized. So I do think that the Valtteri had a pretty decent weekend. He was, he was doing pretty well, but he just didn't have the pace. And again, it came back not to so much to strategy, but just to pace. And they haven't figured out how to crack the code. Alpine is, struggling around, and I just don't know where they are. McLaren, I still hope for McLaren. I guess I kind of pull for them to come back because of their history and how much I appreciate that. But they just seem to be in a huge mess with Lando and Oscar. And I just am not sure where they're going to end up.
I mean, what do you think for a midfield team? What's their hope looking towards Imola, or even just the races immediate, like Monaco? after what you said, the dreams that you had starting into the year, what is success? How do you measure that? Or what do you set your team to feel this is what we can do?
Well, I think what your immediate measure is where you stand in the manufacturer's championship. And so that's why points, I mean, it's not just the money, but the money is important too. But where you stand in the manufacturer's championship is kind of how you measure the team's progress. So if you were fifth last year and you're not fourth this year, you're not improving. That would be my take. I don't know, Dick, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you can only go by where you're at on the points as the season goes.
Yeah,
really. I mean, because each car in the midfield has their issues. Now, and I realize that some of it at Alpine. Here's the CEO of Alpine or Renault coming out, Rossi, coming out and saying, that at the end of the day, the buck stops with Otmar.
Yeah.
And at the end of that's an obvious statement, but this guy Rossi has said enough things. It's sort of like, and this is a reflection on my age and just the fact that I'm a grumpy executive, but there's no way in hell I'd work for that guy.
Right.
No way.
Right.
No way. The guy's not a leader.
I'd have told him, if the buck stops here, here's the buck, you take it and do better. That's what I'd have told him.
Yeah, that's right. Good luck. Yeah.
I mean, I was shocked when I read those comments. I thought, why would a mechanic, why would the people who are going out and doing the hard work, what is this saying to them for the rest of this calendar year? This is the comment from your leader. I thought in corporate work, that is the worst thing you should be saying. Even if you're saying that in the background to your board, you don't want to say that to your on the ground people. I was so disappointed. Yeah. Go ahead. I feel like I was cutting you off.
No. I probably was you too. But I mean, just from a business perspective, right? I've always operated or tried to operate at least under the idea of praise in public, censure in private, right? If you got something to say, you say it behind closed doors. You don't air your dirty laundry, and especially in something like this with those kind of ramifications and all that. What does that do to the overall brand of the Renault group? Let's just think about that for a second, right?
Exactly. Yeah, Monday press is not happy.
Well, do you think is there anything cultural that we may be missing when we're looking at this? Is this more acceptable in French culture to be more vocal publicly when you disagree?
Well,
I think
could be.
I think in French culture, blaming somebody else is better.
Well, if there's anybody listening from France, they can tell us that. They could send us the comment on that one.
Apologies en français.
Yes, correct. But yeah, it's just, I was appalled. I thought this is so sad. But another one that I felt sad for, Nick DeVries. It seemed like he struggled this weekend as well. Any thoughts on that?
Boy, he needs a good win. He needs to not have the problems he's having. There were such high expectations. He's actually shown well in other, when he substituted. He's been a disappointment, and he's going to have a limited time to get his act together. I don't think that he's in danger just yet, but he will be. He will be by mid-season if he hasn't improved.
Oh. Yeah. That's sad. Especially listening to his story of how hard he fought to get this seat. I hope he really can figure out what's holding him back and to make this successful. So let's move to the backbenchers. John, Williams and Haas. And definitely when we talk about Williams, I want to focus in on Logan because he's the American on the grid, of course.
Well, I was critical of Logan in Baku because he blamed the Ferraris for his problem, his accident. And what I would say is whatever mistake he made, however, last is not even the first loser, that's last. But whatever the finishing position, whatever else happened on his weekend, it was a big victory for him from the standpoint of being able to race down the road from where he grew up. He had to be positive about that. I thought he took great responsibility without any hesitation for his mistake. And then he just put in a workmanlike drive. I don't have any criticism of him this weekend. I think he did what he had to do after making a mistake in the first laps, and really and truly, there's so much fraught in the first laps that that's going to happen.
Dick, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think John covered it pretty well. I want Logan to do well. I mean, at the end of the day, he's with. I don't think Williams is now the worst team out there, but they're not one of the best. But he's an American. I do believe that he did enough to justify his seat for this, for this season. And if you watch, like in practice, he's actually, generally speaking, not just getting buried by Albon, who, I mean, I think I think he's a very good driver. I don't think he's Max, but then I think there's only one Max, right? And I think the fact that Sargent is running close enough to his team leader, I think that he's probably going to do just fine as he starts figuring it out. And let's not forget, he'd never raced at Miami before. And so there's a little bit of, he didn't have that track knowledge. And I realized not many, they'd only raced there once before. But, going to a place like Imola or somewhere like that, I think that's going to be really helpful to him.
Isn't that funny, Dick, that an American will have more experience racing on European tracks than he does on American tracks?
Right. Yeah, but that's the way it works in Europe, right? I mean, if you're going to go Formula One, you got to race. You got to race in Europe. You got to do it.
That's right.
The other thing that I do want to circle back on, and this is AlphaTauri and DeVries. When your team leader is Yuki Tsunoda with 2 full seasons under his belt. I mean, no knock on Tsunoda, but at the end of the day, is he really the technical guy that can develop a car that is obviously pretty recalcitrant? The answer is probably not, right? And so DeVries is sitting there going, it's a little bit like what Charles is doing, right? I got to drive the living hell out of this car because it's that bad, Right. And of course, AlphaTauri's coming at Imola. They've got an upgrade package, one of it being an entirely new floor. Who knows? Maybe that all of a sudden now there's a car there and DeVries says, "Oh, I know what to do with this now." Right? And so I wonder about that. The other piece that I was going to add is,
can I interject really quick to ask this question? Yeah. But then DeVries has not even got the experience that Charles does of being in the Formula One grid, right? So he's being, because as you say that, it made me think, but he's kind of got the deck stacked against him in a way. He's the new guy. The car is not really operating in a way that he can do, and he's got a short runway to prove himself. Yes, he did the really great drive last year as the reserve driver, but that's a very different evaluation, instant, short. Everyone likes the new guy, when you come in and you save the project for the moment, right? But it's a whole different thing when you're now the person who's occupying that seat all the time. There's a lot more pressure. I wonder how that he's being set up for success. And what you guys have also said in the past about drivers today and their role in the part of development being trained through the Formula Series, that skill. Yeah, neither of these guys have that, right? John, I feel like you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my sort of concerns here is that these guys, for the most part, come up through formulas where the car is made by the same manufacturer. All teams have the same car manufacturer's product. And so and the cars are many times already pretty well developed, and it's just basic setup is what they have to work towards. But in Formula One, when the manufacturer is building his own car, there's development tasks that the driver has to be a part of. And with limited testing and limited experience at actual development, not setup, but development of a car, and input into the concept behind the car and what the engineers then need to do to redesign the suspension, the geometry, and all the other things. I think that's where some of these guys get lost, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's not a fundamental problem at Ferrari, is that neither Charles nor Carlos have that much experience at developing a car.
And then if you apply that analytical framework, AlphaTauri, you had the previous driver was Pierre, and then you have Yuki, who was, it seemed like between the two, not necessarily the one leading. If there was a person between those two who could lead development, was definitely not Yuki. So you've got kind of a vacancy of development skill set between the two drivers.
Yeah, it's a
right?
skill set. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And then DeVries' seat is on the table. Oh, poor guy. I feel more sorry for him than I already did. Okay. I feel like we sidetracked you though. Dick, you had one more thought, which I'll let that be your final thought. And then John will throw to you because I do see time is going.
Yep. So the last thing that I'll throw out there, and again, we're going back to the midfield. I read a very interesting article where Andrea Stella from McLaren said that their biggest weakness is off brake and off throttle, which I find fascinating because
sorry. I need you to unpack that. I don't understand that. What does that mean?
So basically it's in the zone. You're not on the brakes, you're not on the throttle, and that's where the car is at its worst, which says to me that that's in a coasting phase through a corner, right? Those cars don't coast for very long, but they do. And I find that really amazing because if there ever was going to be a time when, if you're off the brakes, I mean, that's a really upsetting thing to do to a car, is step on the brakes. It's the next most upsetting thing you can do to the car, I think, with that kind of power, is standing on the gas. That says to me that somewhere in the coasting phase through a corner, there's some really bad stuff going on that may very well relate back to what Daniel Ricciardo was trying to deal with last year. And we're just now hearing about it. I don't know.
That's a very interesting point. So Dick, you've driven, I've driven, and one of the things that you can do to avoid that coasting phase is heel and toe driving, where you're applying the brakes and the throttle at the same time, and changing the dynamics of that as you go through the turn so that you don't have that coasting phase. Do you think that that's what we're talking about, is these guys there's not that phase of things in there? They're not dynamically on the throttle and brake at the same time?
It kind of sounds that way, doesn't it? When he says our weakness is off throttle and off brake.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe it means it's when they're sitting in the pits.
Yeah, right.
That's a very interesting. I hadn't seen that, but that is fascinating. We need more information on that. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
we'll go investigate a little more. And
I'm going to write that down. I
feel
like that's something.
For that.
John, I'm going to give you your final thought, and then we're going to wrap it up for today.
Do I have a final thought? I really hate that they had a problem with the recovery track on one of the sport races, the recovery truck. Being on track. That's just, especially in light of the Baku situation, that's just not good at all. I do think that the idea of Miami becoming a night race is attractive. I like that. And the other thought I had about Miami, I wasn't all that thrilled with the pre-race show. It was a little bit too non-Formula One to me, but it did give a character to the Miami race. And I think, COTA is a different race. Miami is now kind of staking their territory as a different sort of race. And I'll be excited to see what Las Vegas is like. And that's kind of an interesting comparison between the 3 U.S. Grand Prix. I think that's kind of cool. And while I didn't appreciate all of it, I think it's really cool that they're kind of staking out their brand that way.
Well, look at you, John, the positive Polly at the end there. I like it.
It could happen.
I love it. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for this conversation. I've enjoyed reviewing the Miami Grand Prix with you. That ends this conversation. But rest assured, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just two guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, thanks for listening.